Morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We'll just give a couple seconds to let participants join in, and then we'll get started. Welcome everyone who's joining us. Just a couple more seconds to allow participants to join in. A warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Neha Sharma, and I work as Evaluation and Learning Specialist at the Climate Investment Funds. I'm here today to welcome you to this event on behalf of the Just Transition Initiative, or JTI team. This event is the Road to COP, Just Transitions in the Climate Agenda. The Just Transition Initiative is a knowledge and learning partnership between the Climate Investment Funds and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. This is the fourth event in a series of events that the JTI has held since March of last year when we were launched. Before we start, we wanted to play a very quick video to introduce you to the Just Transition Initiative and to Just Transitions. Mary Margaret, can I please request you to play the video?
What can we do to ensure that climate action will also deliver justice for workers and communities? This is the key challenge in delivering a just transition. As the world shifts away from fossil fuels and adapts to climate change, we need to ensure that everyone benefits from the transitions to come. The idea of a just transition isn't new. As far back as the 1980s, labor groups called for policies to protect both the environment and workers. By the 2000s, international climate negotiations started to use the term just transition, as more and more voices began to reject the idea that we have to choose between jobs and the environment. But today, the need to create just transitions has never been more pressing.
As countries and regions set ambitious climate goals, we really need to think through the social implications of climate action. We established the Just Transition Initiative to provide new insights through research as well as partnerships, and to offer a platform for thought leadership and knowledge sharing.
Working toward a just transition can help address serious concerns about climate policy and its potential impact on vulnerable communities. But achieving both justice and sustainability is no small task.
Our website is designed to help experts and newcomers understand their options. We've created a resource library with a wide range of original research, published papers, and policy guidance. In our own research, we've analyzed what the just transition concept has meant to different groups and explored the implementation of just transitions in a variety of contexts. But we have a lot more work ahead of us. As energy transitions pick up speed, the Just Transition Initiative will continue to evolve and provide new tools and strategies to help shape a more just and sustainable future for everyone.
Thank you, Mary Margaret. Each time I watch that video, I feel new energy and charged up to do my best towards this agenda. I hope you have the same feeling. And apologies if you weren't able to see that video. There may have been some technical glitches, but it seems like most of you were. We've started a slight bit late, so we'll dive straight in. I wanted to walk you briefly through the agenda for today. I hope you're able to see my screen. So after this brief introduction, Mafalda Duarte, who is the CEO of the Climate Investment Funds, will be interacting and moderating a discussion with our four eminent speakers. These speakers are Kate Hughes, who's the Director for the International Climate and Energy in the UK Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We have Andrew Light, who's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the US Department of Energy. We have Ajay Mathur, who is the Director General Designate for the International Solar Alliance, and previously the Director General for the Energy and Resources Institute in India. And Samantha Smith, who's the Director for the Just Transition Center at the International Trade Union Confederation. After this moderated discussion by Mafalda, we're going to jump into a Q&A moderated by Sarah Ladislow, who is the Senior Vice President and Director for the CSIS energy security and climate change program. And lastly, we'll have a short closing to brief you on some of the new research and strategic directions that the Just Transition Initiative will take. A couple of very quick announcements. This event is being recorded and it will be posted on the Just Transition Initiative website after the event. Please use the Q&A function to pose questions. You have the ability to upvote questions, and if you do so, they have a higher chance of being picked up by our moderators and being posed to the speakers. We've also allowed the use of the chat function to communicate with the audience and share resources, but for questions, we request that you use the Q&A function. And lastly, just to get us warmed up, we have a quick poll for the audience. We wanted to collect some input that can be used later by our speakers and moderators to frame the discussion. Can I please request the IT team to launch the poll? We hope you're able to see the poll, but for those who are not able to, I would read out the question. The question is, to what extent are just transitions relevant to accelerating the pace on climate agenda in the run-up to COP26? The options are very relevant. We cannot achieve the climate goals without a just transition. Somewhat relevant, it will help to accelerate actions, or not relevant, it's getting way too much attention and taking away from the real issues. We hope you're able to respond to this poll. In case you're not able to see the poll, please feel free to use the chat function to also share your thoughts. I request the IT team to close the poll when they've seen about maybe at least 70% participants have responded. I see that the poll was closed, and very pleased to see that most people today, 78%, think that it's very relevant and are very much aligned with the thinking of the organizers for this event. We will bring up the results of this poll again in the Q&A and ask the panelists to reflect on them. But again, like I said, we want to dive straight in. So I'm going to hand over to Mafalda to get us started on the discussion.
Thank you very much, Nia, and welcome from my side as well. We have a lot of participants, the 359 participants. It's also my great pleasure to welcome you to this workshop on my behalf and Sarah's from CSIS. And really let me say what a pleasure it is for me to be among friends and colleagues that really, appreciate the importance of the topic that we are discussing here today. Some of you, I was actually not in contact for some time, so it's great to see you and be with you again. The video that you have just seen expresses and articulates well what we are trying to achieve with this Just Transition Initiative, and also the framing of this topic. Before I'm going to start with those that you want to hear from, and I also want to hear from our eminent speakers, just again to reiterate a couple of really important points that the film also touches on. We are going through very significant, and if we are to meet our climate goals, we will go through some very significant social and economic transformations. In fact, potentially and most likely at a scale and speed that we have not experienced in human history. And I think this needs to land with us because this is really significant. And so, rightly so, it is prompting concerns of the impacts of such disruptive, rapid, deep changes, the impacts that these are likely to have on large sections of the society, and particularly the workers and communities that are reliant on fossil fuels and other natural resources for their livelihoods. So we already live in a world that has quite deep-rooted inequalities. We all know this very well. And it is really important that we avoid, during these times of change, which are necessary, and systemic change, that we exacerbate that. In fact, we should take advantage of this opportunity to really try to address some of those social inequalities and make sure that we are not leaving anyone behind this transition. There are there are many opportunities, but we have to be deliberate in making sure that those opportunities emerge across all segments of society and all groups. Also, it is our belief that if we don't do so, our chances of succeeding in terms of our climate goals are not very great. And we are seeing this around the world with segments of the population showing public discontent with some reforms. And so it is really important that that we understand how central this agenda is to the climate change agenda, to the broader socioeconomic development agenda. So this is the context in which we are having this conversation here today, and I think no one better to get us started than Kate Hughes, who is at the heart of the work being done by the UK to deliver an ambitious COP26. Welcome, Kate, and great seeing you again. You are one of those colleagues that we haven't been working for a while. So it's great to be back with you. So Kate, you have quite a unique and privileged viewpoint on how international climate policy is progressing at the moment, given that UK has the COP presidency this year. So on your side, how are you seeing issues pertaining to these just transitions being framed and discussed in these pre-COP discussions? What are your expectations in terms of just transition in this COP26 context?
Well, thank you so much, Mafalda, and it's lovely to see you again. And thank you to the CIFS and the Centre for Strategic and International Studies for hosting this event, and also for your work on this topic through the Just Transition Initiative, because it's really important that we do understand what's happening in this area. And I think really exciting that this initiative has developed a public platform of just transition resources and guidance in the context of climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts that we can all draw on. And this is an area which has changed so much since I first became involved in the CIFS in 2012 and across this area. And seeing those case studies that share lessons on how our investments in specific countries have and can contribute to efforts to ensure just transitions is incredibly inspiring and important. So thank you. So let me say a little bit, I guess, exactly as you said, about how things look from where I'm sitting in terms of the year ahead and the COP presidency, and I guess the challenges ahead as well. And what are we seeing? So, I mean, of course, the Paris Agreement recognises that the global transition to a climate resilient and low carbon economy needs to happen quickly, but it needs to happen in a fair way as well. And we all know that we need to scale up our action if we're going to get on track for 1.5 degrees. And just on the energy side, to meet the Paris Agreement's goals, we need the global transition to clean power to be at least 4 times faster than it is at present. And it's exactly that speed, and you touched on this, Mafalda, already, that is the challenge too, not just in terms of making that happen, but in the impact that that has on the sectors, on the communities, on the people, on the economy as that happens as well. But we know that urgency is really critical, and this is what is absolutely key to our presidency, our sort of as we come up to our COP towards the end of this year. And just a couple of weeks ago, the UNFCCC published a synthesis report, which shows a snapshot of where we are in terms of the 48 NDCs that have been submitted. And while they only represent about 30% of global emissions, it really shows that we are not on track. We're about 1% reductions between 2010 and 2030 compared to a 45% reduction that we need to see. Now, lots of major emitters are missing from the submissions so far, but it's a real reminder of the scale of the challenge and a real call to action for all countries, particularly those in the G20, particularly the major emitters, to look at their ambition and to make sure that those 2030 targets really do put us on a path to net zero and 1.5 degrees. In the energy sector, in terms of those NDCs and the ambition that we need to stay within 1.5 degrees of warming, coal must be rapidly phased out. So we're looking at 2030 for the OECD countries, and by 2040 for other major emitters, and by 2050 for the rest of the world. So we've got to speed up and really to deepen that shift of global investment patterns away from brown and towards green. And this really is the growth story that I think we're starting to see as well happening around us. We see jobs in the green sector growing faster than the traditional economy. And the ILO estimates that by 2030, 24 million new jobs could be created in green jobs. But we know that those are often different kinds of jobs in different areas with different skills. So it isn't a simple switch. It's not something which is going to happen overnight and isn't going to happen without conscious effort. We've got to be deliberate and thoughtful in what we're doing. So I think for our COP presidency, what we're thinking about very much is not just working on what we need to do, but how we do it. And climate action absolutely needs to consider the impacts on workers and communities. We know that the fossil fuel industry forms the basis of livelihoods of millions of people across the world. And they also make up a significant proportion of government and state revenue in some countries and areas. So reducing investment in fossil fuels or in the transport sector also will have impacts on poverty and public services as well. So we must bring society together in this inclusive manner. And this is exactly what the Just Transition aims to do and exactly what we're aiming to do with COP in terms of that inclusive approach. I think just I wanted to say a little bit in terms of that framing for the year ahead as well. We're looking at various themes for COP26: adaptation, resilience, nature, transport, finance and energy. And of course, they're all really interlinked and we need to see changes and transitions across all of those. And we need to do all of those in an inclusive way. But we know it isn't easy to make those changes. And we need to do it in a way that recognises the impacts on people. But as others have said already in those videos and what you said, Mafalda, this isn't a brand new concept. We're working from a really good framework that we have from the International Labour Organization and their guidelines on what that could look like and what the just transition could look like in terms of employment and decent quality jobs and inclusivity. The UK has also set up the Powering Past Coal Alliance with Canada, which has been a driving force for raising ambition and engaging with coal-intensive communities and bringing together trade unions, local leaders, businesses and governments. And of course, at COP24 as well, the Declaration on Just Transition was published, and that's really garnered a lot of support for the principles we're looking to implement across our approach towards sustainable economies and societies. We've also got a lot of programming behind us as well, where we can point to case studies of examples of where this is starting to happen and to build on this as well. The CIFs have done lots on this in embedding gender and Indigenous population considerations at the fund. We're also looking at projects in South Africa, I know through the CIFs, the Seer Wind Farm, where they really, through your leadership, Mafalda, you know, there's been strong stakeholder engagement with communities and local municipalities and looking at local employment opportunities as well. And in that fantastic CSP power plant in Morocco as well, critical and central to that was that comprehensive social development plan, which went beyond direct employment issues and included proposals on education, sanitation, and even things like rural roads as well, so that actually it's benefiting that much wider community across the piece. So maybe just pause there and say, I think there are some really good foundations to build on in terms of what happens through to COP, but we absolutely have to move from this being a tick box to part of the core design and delivery of our policies and of programmes and thinking of the how and not just the what.
Absolutely, Pete. Thank you so much. And participants, we have more and more. Please start posting your questions on the chat. We will take them in the longer Q&A at the end. You made some really important points. I mean, those statistics, Kate, speak for themselves. We need to really accelerate. And it is a big challenge. You know, of course, we have good practices and examples to build upon. But as you said, I think part of our work is really to make sure that this is central to all of the discussion, so that when we are thinking about the how are we going to do that, that's not an afterthought. that, it's really being built into, the investments that we are thinking, the policies that we are thinking that are required, the deliberation. But I take the point. I think, your point on what, yes, but the how is really, really important. Being mindful of time, Kate, I'm sure we'll come back to you because there will be questions for you. Everybody's interested on COP26 and what the UK thinking is. But let me move on to Andrew Light from the US Department of Energy. Of course, Andrew, with the change in US administration, now we are seeing already, a significant commitment to a much higher level of ambition in terms of climate action. So, I mean, I think to you, and I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in hearing your thoughts, the questions of what do you see as Biden administration climate priorities in a context of this climate crisis and urgency, but also we are in a COVID-19 recovery world, and how do you see that as well, this just transitions factoring in US priorities?
Happy to be here, Mafalda, and good to see you and others on the line here. I think that it's well known, most likely to the folks who have self-selected and decided to tune in to this particular event, that the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has four real top pillars of activity. One is, of course, responding to the pandemic. Secondly, responding to the economic downturn that's been the result of the pandemic, responding to the climate crisis, responding to the crisis that we've had in the United States for decades, but more seriously, I think more noticeably, certainly in the last couple of years, on race and justice issues in America. And the administration has focused really on making sure that you can touch as many of those issues and problems synergistically and try to come up with solutions to all of them that we see in simultaneous ways. One way in which we can see that is that everyone from the president himself through the agencies, certainly my boss, Secretary Jennifer Granholm at the Department of Energy, everyone in my office in the Office of International Affairs at the Department of Energy, firmly believes that attending to climate change is a job creator fundamentally, and it always has been. It is just that we're now beginning to see this much more clearly, I think, than we did back in 2009, as the opening video sort of helped to frame this, and more palpably and with greater sense of urgency. It is, I believe, the greatest opportunity, job creation opportunity that we have in our lifetimes, that we'll ever have in our lifetimes, to shepherd through what will be a just transition to a clean energy, a global clean energy economy. The Biden administration has been absolutely clear that our goal is to achieve net zero emissions in the United States by 2050, and we will be producing shortly a new NDC under the Paris Agreement, which is part of our responsibilities as we rejoin the Paris Agreement on day one of this administration, that will be consistent with that trajectory. And it will be a jobs creator. It will be a domestic policy, fundamentally, that is focused on creating millions of good-paying, clean energy jobs. The opportunities here are enormous. We've known they've been enormous, since the Paris Agreement was first negotiated. In 2016, the International Finance Corporation produced a study of just the commitments of the top 21 developing countries under the Paris Agreement, not the over 180 who had made commitments under the Paris Agreement, but just the top 21 developing countries, and broke it down sector by sector and region by region, and estimated that those commitments created a $23 trillion investment opportunity by 2030. The United States has been largely, to my mind, sitting on the sidelines in the presence of that opportunity in the last 4 years. And now we are back and going to be competing with many other countries around the world to make sure that we can lead and provide the solutions that are needed by countries to achieve their targets under Paris, which are now actually getting better. and we hope that their ambition will increase, and we will see signals of this emerging over the course of the year through the April 22nd Climate Summit that President Biden will host through to the Glasgow Climate Summit in November. With respect to just transition issues, these are a central focus for how we think about certainly domestic climate and energy policy, also global climate and energy policy. As part of President Biden's executive order that he signed on January 27th, he created, one of the many things that were created was a large interagency working group on coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization, which is co-chaired by the National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy, and the Assistant to the President for Economic Policy, Brian Deese, and comprised of some 15 agency and department leaders, including Secretary Granholm. And so they will be looking intensively at what needs to be done to target communities that have already experienced some employment loss from the energy transitions that happened in the last 4 years and that may happen in the future, and to make sure that we are always creating good paying jobs along with the ample opportunities in front of us. The other way that you see this domestically in the United States is certainly through the commitment to energy justice. Again, as one of the 4 pillars of how we put together those 4 pillars of the administration, what's known as the Justy-40 initiative, which President Biden campaigned on in the last election, that 40% of the benefits of federal investments, including clean energy, would flow to racially disadvantaged communities in the United States. And so across the board, in looking at environmental justice, energy justice, energy transitions, access to renewable energy, systematically, the Department of Energy and many other parts of the US government will be going through and making sure that that is another part of how we understand just transition in the context of the revitalization of the focus on climate change in the United States.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I mean, we see a very strong alignment here in terms of the UK. Of course, I mean, we wouldn't expect otherwise between the UK agenda and the new Biden administration. And, you know, I think this is also our thinking behind this Just Transition initiative. You know, countries will be going through these transitions. They will be implementing different initiatives. You mentioned just one of them right now, and really important, you know, Germany is going through also in Europe as an example, you know, other countries in Eastern Europe and all over the world. And it is really important to keep learning from these initiatives and passing on that knowledge and experience elsewhere in the world. So I'm sure that we will have again several of the participants that would like to ask questions. I was told as a moderator you have to keep close track of time. So I'm trying to do that job well. But I'm sure we'll come back to you as well, Andrew. Let me move on to Ajay. Now we'll get the perspective from you know, from India. India is a very interesting case study in this context. I mean, I don't know if it's well known to the participants here, but we've concluded under this Just Transition initiative last year a case study on South Africa. And we are about to publish a case study related to India and coal transition in India as well. And you will see, just like, you know, we saw in the case study in South Africa, and it goes back to the point that we were making earlier on, and Kate was making on the how. These are very complex issues. You know, the implications of these transitions are not just the direct jobs that might be affected when we shift away or move away from some sources of power to others, move away from fossil fuel to clean energy. But there's all sorts of ramifications and linkages that go much beyond those direct jobs and the local communities and have multiple implications across sectors and across regions. Making this this agenda, a complex one. So Ajay, congratulations, first of all, on your recent appointment. I hadn't had a chance yet to congratulate you in person and look forward to working with you in that capacity. But I think one of the relevant questions for you is, how do you see the importance of this just transitions, the just transition agenda to developing countries such as India? And how are you seeing them being recognized, these notions, and applied? What are your thoughts? Let's have a first go at it.
Thanks very much, Mafalda. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. Many thanks to you at CIF and our CSIS colleagues for putting this together. Mafalda, as I look at this, I would like to make 3 points. The first is that for developing countries, it's a particularly difficult task because there's a large amount of people who don't get enough energy or do not have the ability to pay for adequate services, energy services. So the demand is growing. So that's the first point I want to leave you with. Everybody, the IEA, etc., expect that the energy demand in India 20 years from now will be at least double of what it is now. By the way, any country which has a decent standard of living has an energy use which is at least 4 times that in India on a per capita basis. So the first point that I'd like to leave you with is energy demand is increasing and will increase as people have a better quality of life. That obviously has a corollary. If all of that is carbon-based energy, the world is primed. And therefore, the second issue that I'd like to leave you with is that there's a huge amount of effort on promoting renewable energy. The fact that I would be moving to the International Solar Alliance, the Solar Alliance is a recognition of the importance that India puts to accelerating the adoption of solar energy. And today in India, solar energy at rupees 1.99 per kilowatt, coal electricity, by the way, is 3.5 rupees per kilowatt. At 1.99 rupees per kilowatt, solar electricity is the cheapest electricity available in India, but only when the sun is shining. When the sun goes down, and that's when we have our peak demands occurring, at that point of time, coal electricity is the cheapest electricity. And therefore, it is extremely important that in the next few years, storage becomes cheap enough so that renewables plus storage are able to provide us with electricity that is cheaper than coal electricity. So that's the challenge of the moment. And that's the second point I'd like to leave you with, that while we are moving ahead with renewables, the importance of bringing batteries so that their price reduces the price of round-the-clock electricity from renewables is important. The third addresses the issue of just transitions. The biggest pushback that we get is from the very large employments, about 600,000 people in the coal sector directly and indirectly. This is a big deal. Where will these people go? For many of them, this is the first high-paying job they've ever had. There are obviously issues. Renewables does create more jobs than coal mining does. There's no doubt about it. That's the hope that we look at in the future. But the people are different, the geographies are different. The great amount of electricity from solar that will occur in India will occur in South India and West India. Whereas it's in East India, there's the largest amount of coal mining occurs. So there's going to be a geographical imbalance. But the second more important issue is that the kind of skills that a coal miner needs and a technician who is setting up a solar power plant needs are very, very different. And consequently, I think the third point I want to make is that the first challenge that we have is to ensure that people have the right kinds of skills that are needed to take advantage of this transition, and ensure that the day the last coal power plant closes is the day the last coal mine closes, is the day the last coal miner retires. Only that would help us move in a just transition towards a renewable future.
Ajay, you make really important points, and that's exactly what what we are seeing and conveying through these case studies. That the same in South Africa. The point that you just made, the geographies that stand to benefit from the clean energy investments are not the same geographies where the coal industry is mostly located. And so the impacts, the geographical impacts there. And you also touched on an important point, which is, the skill set. And so you also made another important point. And Kate mentioned the PPCA. Last week there was another event on the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And one of the sessions we were again talking about the analysis that RMI did with Carbon Tracker and Sierra Club on the differences between developed countries and developing countries when it comes to net savings or net costs from this coal transition. And the reality being that while in many developed countries, there are currently net savings already to be made from this transition in developing countries. And they looked at India, they looked at China, and a couple of other examples. At the moment, there would be net costs, and there are many still coal-fired power plants in the developing countries that are economical. But you also made an important point, which was around storage. We hear this often, this point that clean energy and solar energy is cheaper than the fossil fuel alternatives, but there's that catch, which is yes, but the intermittency nature of the clean energy, and unless if there is storage, which is still the cost curves still need to come down on storage, then that economic advantage is no longer there. So a lot there. But just, I know I'm again looking at my watch here, and if you give me just a quick answer here, Ajay, how do you see, you were basically saying just transition is really important, and you've spoken about 600,000 people employed in coal sector directly or indirectly in India. Is this an agenda that you see India championing in the run-up to COP26?
Oh, absolutely. I think the Prime Minister has said this often. He said this last month at the World Sustainable Development Summit, which was hosted by Terry, and he inaugurated that at the end of the day, it's the just transition which makes the case, which makes the ethical case for a transition towards solar energy. And he made the point that no person should be left behind. So there is a recognition, there is a very clear understanding that this is not a problem which is going to solve by itself. There would have to be interventions. And we are all in this together. We are learning it as we go along.
Very good. Excellent. We are very glad to hear that, because that's also the point that we are making all across, is that this needs to be at the core of this agenda if we are to succeed on the Paris Agreement goals and our climate change goals. The just transition agenda needs to be at the center. Thank you, Ajay. We'll come back to you, because I'm sure that again we will be having questions from our large audience. Samantha, thank you very much as well for being with us. Already several colleagues here spoke about jobs and quality jobs. What do you think are the top priorities for labor organizations when engaging in these national and international climate policy discussions, and especially in the run-up to COP? What's your sense of what you are seeing, and what in terms of what you are participating in? Are we on the right track?
Well, I guess it will surprise no one that I'm also going to talk about jobs, right? In 2020, globally, 500 million formal jobs disappeared. And we expect that another 500 million formal jobs are going to disappear in 2021. And then in addition to that, you've got about 1 billion people who are informally employed, who either lost their work or fear that they're going to lose their work. So you're really just talking about a kind of jobs apocalypse. And so, in basically every situation where you're going to encounter the labor movement, whether it's in international fora, in the negotiations leading up to the COP, in the G7, the G20, and so on, we're going to be talking about the need to create good climate jobs. And for that, as part of a broader social contract where people have rights at work, where people have pensions and social protection, where we have investment in care and so on. So I think that if we can't have a recovery that is rich in good jobs and that respects people's rights, also rights to form trade unions, then it's pretty hard to see how you're going to have the kind of political stability we need to roll out climate policy. And if climate policy isn't, really a jobs program, it's also hard to see how people are going to support it more broadly. So that's our priority. In terms of whether we think things are on the right track, well, in the formal negotiations, we would really like to see many more countries not only sort of mouthing the words just transition in their revised national development plans or nationally determined contribution plans. We would actually like to see real plans for just transition that are based on social dialogue, based on the ILO's guidelines. I was very happy to hear Kate Hughes shout those out. And really based on this dialogue with workers and their unions, with employers and with government. I know we were also involved in the Powering Past Coal Alliance Summit late last week, and we were very happy to hear the UN Secretary General reinforce the UN's support for just transition as a key part of climate action. You can't do it without it. And also to call on all countries to embrace the ILO guidelines for just transition. So at the moment, it's really South Africa that has just transition in its commitments under the Paris Agreement. A couple of other countries have mentioned it, but they can't really back it up at the national level. So we would like to see much stronger commitments, much more real commitments on that front. Beyond that, we're working a lot right now with the European trade unions, and also definitely collaborating with our affiliate in the United States, the AFL-CIO. And so I think we're all waiting to see in the US if, for example, the PRO Act, which has just been introduced in Congress, if that passes, because that would do a lot to guarantee these rights that are the basis for good jobs. And also to see if indeed the big infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better bill that we all know is coming, we'd like to see the job creation, and especially the job creation in infrastructure and clean energy. Like that would be huge. And in Europe, the EU has already decided and rolled out the Green Deal, the multi-year budget, Next Gen EU. And we're working a lot now to see how that gets implemented. And again, the two big questions are, where are the jobs? Will they be good jobs? And will governments actually base their recovery plans and their climate plans on dialogue that involves workers and their unions? In many countries, they're really not doing that. I think I am personally, I'm sort of a mixture of, sort of beaten down by a year of bad news, as I'm sure many people are. but also a bit optimistic about some of the things that are coming out of governments right now, and especially in the EU and in the US. So if we get delivery on the things that have been promised, also, maybe some political developments in countries such as Brazil, where we see that Lula, the leader of our movement in Brazil, with the Workers' Party being tied to the unions, that his convictions have been erased, that he has all of his political rights restored. We see some very hopeful developments in South Africa and just transition. So we think we could see quite a big year on this issue, and very, of course, happy to see political leaders make it front and center, but now we need to make it real for people on the ground.
Thank you, Samantha. In fact, it's very interesting because I was recently in another event and somebody, a speaker was speaking about job losses. I mean, it was a US statistics, but even beyond the gross number of job losses, what caught my attention in that intervention was when she said in December in the US, 140,000 job losses. But she then said 156,000 losses, women job losses, and 16,000 men gained jobs. So that net showed this massive difference between what is happening with women and the losses for women, vis-a-vis the global numbers. But this is also, just one point in terms of, looking at the gender equality issues, the disadvantaged groups, the importance of being deliberate on that as well. But I think, as we've heard from several of you, this point that we are seeing massive impacts of COVID-19 impact in the labor markets and job losses. And at the same time, we know from the experts and the agencies looking at this that, there's multiple opportunities for good new jobs associated with investments that would help us meet the climate goals. So this is the moment to seize this, because we have to go through a recovery. We'll have to regain these losses that are being lost. And how do we make all of this come together? I think it's the critical question. But thinking very carefully as well around the point that Ajay was making, which is we can't just think that immediately jobs will transfer, people will transfer from one job to the other just like that. There have to be mechanisms and support in terms of skill development and social protection that, enable this transition to happen meaningfully.
So Mafalda, if I can just jump in, I mean, we hear there's a lot of discussion about skills, but generally, like, the gap is not skills. It's like often a wage gap. If you can't get people to come and take that work, it's often because the wages and conditions aren't good enough. And what we're seeing right now in terms of employment is actually not at all about people's skills. It's that the jobs just aren't there because, as you say, so many of them have disappeared. So, I mean, from our perspective, like if just transition ends up being about people's skills, then we're missing something. Because in the first instance, people need jobs, and they need good jobs, and they need rights at work. And in the second instance, when we're talking about transition for coal miners, I mean, often we want to think that, okay, there's going to be a transition, or there should be a transition just within the power sector and things associated with it. But really, if you're mining coal today, your best job tomorrow, if the mine closes, would be to mine something else. And we will need more minerals in a clean energy economy. We'll also need to clean up coal mines that exist. This is a huge problem in a lot of countries where you have illegal, very dangerous mining in mines that basically have been commercially closed. And the third best job for coal miners is in skilled construction. And for all of these jobs, there's very high skill transfer. So I just really want to encourage us to keep our focus on getting people back to work. And as you say, not just in male-dominated professions, but also good jobs for everyone, and maybe especially women.
Thank you very much. So I will now pass it on to, thank you all of our great speakers. I would have many questions myself, but I have to now ask Sarah. Sarah, please lead us now in terms of the facilitated discussion. And I'm sure that we've had quite a few good questions coming in through the chat. Sarah, over to you.
Yes, we have indeed. Thank you so much, Mafalda. Thanks everybody for those really important and interesting intro comments. So I want to do a few things, and just a reminder, the quicker we ask and answer, the more questions we can get in, and we've had quite a few of them. So I'll try and keep a bit of a brisk pace. We started this with a poll, right, where we got a self-selected audience type of response, where 78% of all of us thought that a just transition is really important for accelerating the energy transition. But, I want to point out that a number of our questions that we've received have really sort of pulled at attention here, which is, how do we do that? It's nice to say that, which I think Samantha brought up before, but it's very different to think about the mechanics of incorporating just transition into all of our sort of, very ambitious energy transition planning. So I thought maybe as a first step, I'd like to go back to each of you. Maybe we'll go in the order that you spoke, to ask, what is it that is the most important part of being able to embed the just transition part of a just transition in your energy transition plans as you're thinking about them from the vantage points that you talked about today? So maybe we'll start with Kate, and then go to Andrew, and then Ajay and Sam.
So yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a really important question, and I guess there are things that I could say about what the UK is doing, but maybe it's of more general interest to talk about what we're thinking of in terms of COP26, and particularly sort of thinking about what this looks like through the Energy Transition Council that we have created, that brings together a number of different multilateral organisations to provide the political, financial and technical leadership in the power sector, so that we can actually work with countries to support them in that real kind of granular level in terms of that transition as well, and providing that sort of support package all the way across those challenges as well. So the ILO is part of our Energy Transition Council to bring some of that knowledge to it, and the idea is that in sort of dialogues with countries, we can, as I say, kind of get under the skin of the challenges there and look at what the particular economic situation, the job situation looks like in countries, and understand what the most attractive options might look like for new power generation, and what the particular challenges are as well from moving away, for example, from coal as not just a power source, but as a provider of jobs as well into the economy too. So through the Energy Transition Council, donor countries, the private sector and these international organisations will work to direct international funding towards projects that support the conditions for a just transition, and looking at alternative employment opportunities as well. And some of this also includes committing to minimum labour standards too. So it's not just about different jobs, it's about high quality, high paid jobs as well. And we're also looking to use the Powering Past Coal Alliance as well to commit to investing back into the real economy as well. So I recognise, and kind of your call to sort of keep things sort of short as well, so we can keep this bit of the discussion moving as well. This isn't easy, and we sometimes talk about that kind of orderly transition. This isn't something which is going to happen overnight, and we're going to need to take our time over it as well. So where we can align the political side of things, the economic, the investment side of things, and leverage that real expertise, I think that's going to help. It's not the full answer, and of course we need countries to be working with us as well, and to then draw on the case studies that we've talked about a bit about today as well, to show where and how it can be done.
Thanks, Kate. Andrew, your thoughts on this?
Sure. So with respect to the overall question of the prioritization for action in the United States, I'm not going to answer that. That's really really more under the purview of my colleagues and colleagues throughout the interagency who are working on the interagency working group on coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization, and also on the Justice 40 initiative. I'll say two quick things about, from the perspective of my role as directing the Department of Energy's international equities. And on the one hand, I would sort of say that, look, the overall, we're really coming together in the entire US government to really focus on three primary goals for international energy diplomacy and engagement: energy security, promotion of energy security, energy for development, and decarbonization. And everything that we do has to try to maximize the benefits of all three of those goals, certainly without sort of winding up in a position, as Ajay said, where you achieve some of those goals on a high carbon diet again, and you wind up wiping out within less than a generation every single benefit that you might be able to get, which we don't want to do. For me personally, and with respect to the priorities of my office, to me, that means a very intensive focus on reduction of energy poverty, which is something that I've spent a lot of my career working on. My last tour through government in the second half of the Obama administration, I had special responsibility for the US-India relationship on climate change, and worked with Ajay and many other colleagues in the Indian government to focus on what we can do, what the United States can do to eliminate energy poverty and all of the things that it makes worse, frankly, and makes it almost impossible to get out of a state of poverty when you're in a state of energy poverty. And at the same time, build up resilience of energy systems in the face of climate change. And this is obviously not just a problem in developing countries around the world, it's a big problem in the United States, as we've seen recently as well. And that is something that's absolutely essential in order to think about what does a just transition look like. The second thing I'd just sort of say quickly is, when I was talking earlier about that massive trillions of dollars of opportunity that's available out there in the world, one of the ways that I think about my job is that I need to demonstrate and actually prove that every single bit of bilateral and multilateral cooperation that the US government does on energy is something that also eliminates energy poverty, creates resilience in other countries, builds jobs in other countries, and builds jobs in the United States at home. And we have to have the capacity, and we do have the capacity, we just need to organize it in order to demonstrate that you can actually bring good jobs home when the United States is a good player on the international stage, on helping the world to get closer to our agreed upon targets under the Paris Agreement. These can build jobs in specific places in the country, across the country, in blue states, red states, purple states, all the states, as well as in communities of need, some of which, that we've already been discussing on this. And I think that systematically we have to have that capacity in order to prioritize the kinds of engagement. It's early days in the administration, but that is where we're headed.
Thanks, Andrew. That's really important perspective. I mean, it doesn't, not lost on a lot of us, but how important understanding that all of these investments and plans are now being perceived fundamentally as jobs plans, right? Not just least cost reduction pathways to a decarbonized society, but jobs plans, which is very different than we were a decade ago. Ajay, I'd like to get your view as well. You mentioned a number of different factors that you thought were important for a just transition, but if you could prioritize, one or two of them, what do you think is most important for making sure just transition is a wind at the back of the decarbonization agenda?
At the heart of it, when people lose jobs, they do it, or they obviously lose the economic lifeline, but they also lose their social lifeline, and the environmental world around them also crumbles. Remember that most coal miners are miners in coal mines that have occurred in the same areas where they had farms earlier. And in 2 generations, they've forgotten all about farming. So this happens in many dimensions. Clearly, what makes sense for one area with one coal-bearing area does not mean the same for another. Many years ago, I read in, I think it was the New York Times, that in the Appalachian area, moving to beekeeping was actually more profitable than working in coal mining. The short point is, it is local. What we move to from coal mining is very local. So what we need to do is to work with the people who can make this happen. The local bankers. What are the kinds of economic options that make sense? How do they provide loans for that? In the Indian context, there is a government official called a block development officer who is in charge of the infrastructural needs, the investment in the infrastructural needs in a small geographical jurisdiction. they need to understand what are the kinds of options that they move to. So it is this level of enabling skill building or strengthening skill building that is required. I would put that as the first priority.
Thank you, Ajay. Sam, I want to get your perspective on this before as well. We've talked about this before, but I think I might know your answer, but let's see if I'm right.
Yeah, well, you might have said part of my answer already, and maybe Andrew and AJ also said part of it. My answer is going to be that the first priority is actually that people have rights at work. Because one thing we know is that you're not going to get a good job unless you're organized for it. And in a lot of countries, including India, you don't actually have to be a union member to get the benefit of a collective bargaining contract. In fact, contract workers in the coal sector, you know, they're not necessarily union members, but they are being collectively, their rights are being secured by those who are organized in collective bargaining with Coal India. So when is rights at work and the right to form a union? And not to just sort of single out India, this is an issue for developed countries as well, for the UK and for the US. And then two is, as you said, we need to rethink, or it's amazing to see, and we also need to see it in practice, how climate policy is actually good jobs policy. Because if people don't see how climate policy is going to solve their problems, which right now the biggest problem is being unemployed, then why would they support it? And I guess the last thing that I just want to pick up on what AJ said, you know, we work with unions all around the world on just transition, and it is different in different places. And the way, you know, you have these basic principles, but then what a solution might be for coal miners in one region might be different in other regions. So, you know, this idea of regional development plans is pretty important.
That's great. Yes, you definitely covered it, Sam. I was thinking about social dialogue, which I think was embedded sort of in your in your encompassing statements there, which I've learned a lot about through working with you over the last year or so. We've got a few minutes left. I want to try to get to two core tensions that were in our questions, and I'll divide them up. The first to Andrew and Ajay, and then the second to Kate and Sam. But if you wanted to add on something really bad, just wave, and I'll make sure I try to get you in. Andrew and Ajay, we have a core tension here in a lot of our questions, which is how do we get developing countries and developed countries to have a productive dialogue on this topic of just transitions when developing countries, arguably have every right in the world to develop the resources that they have, the constraint of being put under to do it in a cleaner way when that's not been the way development has happened in the past. What is needed in the dialogue between developed and developing country? We've had a lot of skepticism, or a few bits of skepticism in our questions about the willingness of China and India to genuinely engage in a just transition conversation, given the heavy coal nature of their economies as well. So I'm just curious, is it tech transfer? Is it finance? Is it dialogue on how to do the sort of skills training and the just transitions? What is it that the international sort of community between developed and developing countries can contribute here to making the transition easier for developing countries? And maybe I'll start with Ajay and then go to Andrew.
I think there are two things that come to mind. The first is that as we make the transition, it is very clear that this would be led by economics. Ultimately, it is the willingness and ability of people to pay for energy which matters, and especially in a society which is starved of energy for many reasons, including the willingness to pay. Therefore, making renewable energy cheaper is the most important goal, and that's at the heart of Indian policy. So it is irrelevant what other countries believe or think about it. If internally we are able to make renewable energy cheaper, coal becomes economically obsolete. That's the first part. The second part is that there has not been a great international experience in either financial or technology transfer. What we learned in the years before Paris is that given India's large market or China's large market, there were ways in which we could manage the financial and technological transitions. And whether it was solar photovoltaics or whether it was LED bulbs, in both of those, we saw great price reductions occurring so that the high carbon emitting options became economically obsolete. And that is what we're trying to do now.
Excellent. Thank you, Ajay. Andrew, would you like to add to that?
I just had a couple things to it. On the one hand, I agree with Ajay that this is about fundamentally agreeing on an energy transition, and I think that is the really hopeful thing that we see more and more countries driving towards. They don't have exactly the same mid-century targets and stuff like that, but we are kind of starting to align, and in a place that's close enough to each other that we can really put pressure on each other, which is what the whole kind of architecture of Paris was designed to do as well. So we're seeing that kind of not only inside the regular 5-year cycles of Paris, but also in the larger sort of discussions that we're having about this. And that will hopefully get us more aligned as we sort of move forward and we see that this is an opportunity discussion and not at all just any more simply a burden sharing discussion. The second thing on this is that I think that when you look at something like Prime Minister Modi's incredible targets, and in a good way, of 450 gigawatts of non-fossil energy by 2030, that is a target that is going to be met by driving as much private sector capital into India as possible at the best rates possible so that something like that is to be achieved. That is going to be a target that outstrips any potential, negotiated target we would get for capitalization of the Green Climate Fund. And that's the kind of ambition that you want to have. And so to do it, we really have to get together and make sure that's not one country's responsibility to try to do that, because it's certainly not. It is a global community's responsibility to do that, and then move country by country by country around the world that wants to do that, that wants to achieve similar levels of ambition. And finally here, I think that we have to realize that we will have some partnerships on what we can learn from each other in transitions, which are going to look at may not look exactly, will certainly not follow this older conversation of developed and developing countries. So the United States is further behind than Europe is on energy transitions. We probably have more to learn, frankly, from a country like India than we do from many countries in Europe, just given the pace at which we're now finally kind of moving forward with much more greater levels of ambition and the dedicated need to do this in a way that we've been talking about for too long and not doing enough on. And so when we look at that, when we look at the sort of the ways in which we can keep some of these communities alive, like a serious conversation and a serious level of deployment on things like carbon capture and sequestration technology, which again, it's just not had the attention that it deserves and needs to happen. When we look at the similar problems that are faced like countries, the similar challenges, hurdles, and opportunities faced by countries like the US and India, you can see a lot more of a motivation for working together on that kind of technology solution side of the question, as well as the way we sort of think about creating the financial conditions whereby countries can actually meet these critically important targets.
Thank you. Such important points. Okay, I'm asking for a dispensation from the powers that be for a couple extra minutes, because I do want to ask Kate and Sam about this last tension. Lots of questions about, sure, we need a coal phase out. We also happen to be building more coal-fired power plants. So what are we doing really here? And how do we make sure that for those countries that are building a coal future and those that are leaving one behind, we start to talk in very honest terms about what it means to phase out that sector, what it means to, deal with those communities. How do we do that in just a couple of minutes? So I'll go to Sam and then let Kate have the last word here.
Yeah, well, how you do that is that you start planning before the mine closes. Right? Because if there's one thing that we've learned from working with unions and also governments around the world, it's that if you start planning the transition when stuff is about to close, you're already too late. So the first lesson is that local economic diversification is everything, and you have to start that early and be sure that it's job rich. I think the other issue is that we, we know that globally there are many countries that are energy starved, either because there's not enough generation or energy is too expensive. But at the same time, all of those countries have a desire and maybe also an obligation to help people move from informal, unsafe employment into good jobs. And so attaching labor standards to your energy transition, to public investment, to private investment, to stuff that's going to get built to permitting is absolutely key. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, Kate, love to hear your view on the same topic.
Well, thank you. So I agree with what Sam said there and some of that planning point. I mean, one of the most powerful things I think that is happening are the commitments towards net zero. I mean, we have a huge sort of global set of commitments towards net zero now, and certainly, in the UK, where we have legislated for net zero, it's absolutely clear to everyone in the economy that's what we're heading for. And that means, in terms of policy certainty and investor certainty, there's nowhere to hide. Every bit of the economy has to act in the same direction. And as we move towards global net zero, and we're very, very clear on those temperature targets, actually, we are seeing through the finance sector as well, through governments, that increasingly investing in coal is not the answer. And that's not where the private finance wants to be. People don't want to have those kinds of stranded assets as well. So that long-term policy certainty, setting those targets and then acting through all of the sectors that we can, I think will certainly sort of shift the sectors and countries increasingly away from coal. But there are a number of things that we also then need to do to help countries who might be thinking about building coal-fired power stations to make different decisions. And that's, again, partly where the international institutions can come together to show those alternatives. And we're increasingly seeing that at the MDBs, and we know we need them to do more. And it would be remiss of me as well not to kind of mention the work that the CIFS has been doing to think in this space and try and pull together an accelerating coal transition fund as well to really underpin and support that transition, because we know it's not going to happen without support and some finance as well to really kickstart it, particularly in some countries where that help is needed to make it a reality. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Such important set of comments and perspectives. I'm going to turn it back over to Neha here for some closing remarks. But personally, just want to say thank you for all the work that you're all engaged in. It's important. It's been a rough year, not 2021, but the last 12 months. And as Andrew said, being very opportunity oriented about it does sort of put it in the right frame. It'll be a big transition for everybody, but if we do it right, it can be a really productive and positive one as well. So thank you all very much for your comments and for your time today. Neha, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I'll keep this very short since we are a bit over time, but just wanted to extend a really warm thank you to all the speakers and the moderators today. And if I may take some liberties, extending the International Women's Day celebrations from yesterday, I wanted to extend a especially warm thank you and gratitude to the strong female leadership that we witnessed today and we continue to in the field of climate change. So thank you. And lastly, just wanted to leave behind some, I'll share my screen again. So as you know, the Just Transition Initiative launched late last year, a Just Transition Resource Library. We hope you're able to see this library. It has about 100 or so curated resources, including case studies and tools. We saw strongly today coming from the speakers is need for shared learning, whether it be the global north, global south, across sectors, and the need to look at just transitions, not just in the energy sector, but related sectors, including forestry, agriculture, land use, other themes that came up today. So we're planning to extend this resource library this year and look at just transitions as they might be relevant to other sectors. So we hope you'll watch this space. In addition, this year through the Just Transition Initiative, we're launching 2 new research pieces. The first will look at the role of just transitions in the COVID-19 recovery. We've heard a lot about green transitions. We've heard about just recovery, but we're really going to apply the just transitions lens to recovery and stimulus packages taking place around the world, looking at social inclusion issues and distributional impacts and what that means for these stimulus packages. And we will publish a research paper with in-depth case study analysis on the readiness for coal transitions, focusing both on developed and developing countries. So just sharing a few things that are coming from the Just Transition Initiative umbrella and thanking everybody for participating. We know that there are a few unanswered questions, and we'll make an attempt from our team to answer them through the format of a blog or reaching out to our speakers afterwards to see if they don't mind sharing some thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for joining.